Hello everyone, FPL Raptor here and welcome back to another video on my YouTube channel. In today's video, I will be previewing Game Week 14 and giving you some tips and tricks ahead of the upcoming game week. We've only got 3 weeks left now till the World Cup, so this really is crunch time. If you are enjoying the content here on this channel, please remember to like, comment and subscribe. But without further ado, let's jump into today's video. So guys, I thought it'd be useful before we jump into looking at specific players to transfer in and out, which teams have the best fixtures over the remaining 3 weeks before the World Cup. The reason we're only looking to the World Cup, of course, the World Cup will be a 6-week break from Premier League football and of course FPL, and we'll have a complete reset because everyone will have unlimited transfers between Game Week 16 and Game Week 17. So it's pretty much like starting the season over again. Of course, team value will come into it. Some people will be able to afford slightly better team than others, but because everyone will have unlimited transfers, it is pretty much like a full reset. So we realistically only need to look at the next 3 weeks. And according to Fantasy Football Hub, these are the 8 teams with the best fixtures from 1st to 8th over the next 3 weeks. Now, I disagree slightly with some of this, and what you'll find with a lot of models is models really don't like away fixtures, and models really like home fixtures. So if teams have 2 home fixtures over the next 3, or potentially even 3 home fixtures, which I don't think any teams do, but 2 out of the next 3 if they're at home, and especially if those home fixtures are relatively easy, Fantasy Football Hub and other models will really favour that. Whereas for a team such as Everton, I think they've got really good fixtures. Because they've got 2 away fixtures, they're slightly lower down. So do take that into account. But interestingly, City and Liverpool are 2 of the teams that have the best fixtures over the next 3. City in particular look fantastic, but I think most of us will be on a triple up anyway. And I still do think, despite his benching in Game Week 13, that Cancelo, Foden and Haaland are the best triple up you can have. I still think De Bruyne is fantastic. You could go for Ederson if you want to, but I think that is the triple up. Leicester, Fulham, Brentford. I still think if you haven't yet brought in Foden, I think Foden's a fantastic transfer in for Game Week 14. You might obviously want to wait for the Champions League to see what happens there, but I just personally think that Foden will start. He started every Premier League game this season apart from 13, so I think he's still a fine player to bring in. Liverpool's a tricky one, right? Because I'm looking at maybe taking Salah out, but almost definitely taking Firmino out. So I can't really blame people if they're looking to sell the Liverpool assets, but this might suggest with 2 really good home fixtures either side of Tottenham, and Tottenham look like a team that you could get at. Maybe Liverpool assets aren't the best to sell, and it's probably why I'm leaning towards keeping Salah. I do think if you've got 2 free transfers, nothing to do, and you maybe want to move to Kane or you want to move to maybe spreading the funds a little bit into a 1 premium draft, I don't mind selling Salah, and I don't mind selling Trent, Robertson. To be honest, if you told me you were selling your Liverpool assets, I can't really complain with that. But I would say just look at the fixtures and think, are there maybe other players in your team that it makes slightly more sense to sell? West Ham are in there, and again, Bowen is a player that I'm looking at selling this week, and I thought it was funny as I was putting this graphic together that I'm looking at selling Firmino and Bowen in my own team. And when I look at this, I'm like, actually, is that potentially not the best idea to be selling those 2? And again, it comes down to the fact that after Manchester United, which isn't a great fixture, Crystal Palace and Leicester both at home, and West Ham generally are pretty good at home. Again, getting a 1-0, 2-0 win in Game Week 13 against Bournemouth. That game is just finished. I'm recording this immediately after. So they are pretty good at home. It looks like 2 good fixtures. Again, maybe it doesn't make sense for me to sell Bowen, but I think I'm still going to move him on. Bournemouth are in there as well. Solanke, you can see on this list, Solanke is on the list, but of course he did pick up that injury in the game that's literally just finished. So do keep an eye on Solanke. If he is out, I'd maybe look to keep him if it looks like it's going to be short term, because the fixtures in 15 and 16 look fantastic. If he's out long term, obviously you've got to sell him, but just wait as long as possible to find out, because to be honest, I'm still looking at maybe bringing in Solanke for 15 and 16. They look like 2 nice fixtures. The team that I'm really looking at though, and again, the Fantasy Football Hub sort of fixture ticker have them at 5th, but I think Fulham, Leicester, Bournemouth are 3 great fixtures. Yes, 2 of them are away, but I do think Everton are starting to improve slightly from an attacking perspective. So I am starting to look at a real differential, and we will discuss it when we get to the differential section for this video, and also in the team selection video, because I personally am looking at bringing him in. DCL could be a great option, but outside that, you've got maybe like an Iwobi, a Gordon, or a Mikalenko, or a Tarkowski. Everton do have some decent options, and those, I would say Everton are the only team in the Premier outside of Man City over the next 3 that I would say I like all 3 of their fixtures. Every other team, I've got one where I'm like, I don't really like that. Whereas Everton, Fulham, Leicester, Bournemouth, I would happily start my Everton asset in all 3 of those. So do take a look at some of the Everton assets. A lot of them pretty cheap. Spurs are a pretty similar situation to like Liverpool. 2 good fixtures either side of that clash against Liverpool in Game Week 15. I would not mind keeping / buying Spurs assets at the moment. Harry Kane is still a fantastic option, and I think the defenders, probably Dyer and Romero, would be my top 2 choices, but you could take a risk on someone like a Doherty or Perisic. Palace, we've spoken about for a while. Palace have had good fixtures from about sort of game week 10 now. Southampton, West Ham, Forest aren't bad. And West Ham away being the only slightly tricky fixture. Palace, I guess, are in a similar situation to Everton and Man City, where you could play your Palace asset for all 3. I'll be completely honest, we're going to discuss it in one of the next sections. I would not be selling Zaha right now. I think he's a fantastic option. I wouldn't sell him for Saka. I may sell him for Foden, but I would still be tempted to keep with those 3 fixtures. The fact he's on penalties and his data's still pretty good, but I really still like Palace assets for the next 3. Maybe after the World Cup, we'll be looking at moving them on, but for now, they look pretty good. And then the team that just snuck in an 8th are actually Nottingham Forest, who have improved slightly, especially defensively. You could go for a Henderson or a Williams or like an Awoniyi or Lingard in attack, but realistically, I don't think many of us are looking at Forest assets. So looking at these fixtures, I guess just to say, definitely load up on City, as you would expect anyway. Liverpool and West Ham might be worth hanging on to, along with someone like a Solanke. And then I'm just looking at maybe Everton and Palace as 2 teams that you could play your players in all 3 of the next fixtures. So they're the best fixtures. Hope that gives you a bit of an idea about which sort of players and teams we should be targeting. Now let's talk about something which is very important, which is those players that are on 4 yellow cards. So if you are wondering how Game Week 13 finished for me, I am on a small red arrow from about 715th to 830th, as you can see above my head. So it was an okay week. I was about 1 or 2 points away from a green arrow. I can't complain with that. I think it's a pretty decent week considering it didn't go well for a lot of my players. I don't want to take too long to talk about this section. I just want to note that we now have 3 weeks till the World Cup, and all of these players on your screen, I might have missed a couple off, but these are the main ones. The main ones are obviously highlighted in orange. All of the players on your screen are on 4 yellow cards. If a player gets 5 yellow cards in the Premier League, they get a 1-game suspension. That will then dissipate. The suspension will disappear for 5 yellow cards after that team that they play for has played 19 Premier League games. So this will actually be important for post-World Cup as well, because obviously the World Cup's only been after like 16 Premier League games. So this will be important post-World Cup. But for now, 3 weeks till the World Cup, these players might be worth avoiding, or just at least acknowledge the risk you have of bringing them in. Now, I think for players like Jesus and Tony, who are the only 2 forwards on 4 yellow cards, it may still be worth bringing them in. Both of these players play Nottingham Forest in the next 2 weeks. Again, they have improved, but still a good fixture to target. And they've both got really good data. So I still think Jesus and Tony might be worth targeting, but acknowledge the risk of bringing them in. None of the midfielders I don't think are particularly interesting. I've seen a few people mentioning Bruno Fernandes, so do just note that Fernandes is on 4 yellows, but the rest of the players I don't think we're looking at anyway. And then there are 3 noteworthy defenders that are on 4 yellow cards that I've seen a lot of people either transferring in or at least talking about, and that is Mark Gahey. Again, Palace do have good fixtures. I would probably just go for Anderson if you still want a Palace defender, just because Gahey's on 4 yellows. Saliba, of course, a lot of people looking at the Arsenal assets due to the fixture that they've got in Game Week 14 against Nottingham Forest. I still wouldn't choose Saliba, not only because of the 4 yellow cards, but he still doesn't have the best data as an Arsenal defender. I still think I prefer White and Gabriel, definitely when you take into account the 4 yellows, so I would be avoiding Saliba personally. And then Manchester United almost made it into the teams with the best fixtures, but they do have a couple of away fixtures over the next 3. Dalot, yes, has been showing pretty good data for his price, but again, being on 4 yellows, not having a great end product, and Manchester United also not being perfect defensively, I would probably avoid Dalot myself. Fabian Schär is on that list too. A few people looking at Newcastle defenders, and then there are a few others that are also on 4 yellow cards. So what I would say is, if you really want a player, and you think there's high upside in bringing them in, such as a Jesus or Tony, I wouldn't necessarily let this change your decision. But I think especially for the defenders, who obviously will find it a lot easier to pick up yellow cards, and if you've maybe got a 50-50 decision between someone on 4, like a Saliba versus a White, I would tend to just favour the player that's not on 4 yellows. The reason for that is you just don't want to have another transfer to deal with. When we've only got 3 weeks now, you're only going to have potentially 3 or 4 free transfers. I just don't think it's worth having to use one of those on a player that gets 4 yellows, especially as it's going to be to bring them in and then also to take them out as well. So I would just bear this in mind. Don't want to talk about it for too long. There are a few noteworthy players on 3 yellows, but it's going to be very unlikely that they pick up 2 yellows across the next 2 weeks to then be banned before Game Week 16. So I thought it might be interesting to look at some spicy differentials ahead of the final 3 weeks. These are some players that have fairly low ownership that maybe haven't been talked about that much. Some of them obviously have, that I think might be worth bringing in over the next 3 due to either fixtures, decent underlying data, a bit of a gut feeling, or maybe a combination of all of that. As I always say with differentials, a couple of things. Number one, when I'm highlighting differentials that might be good picks, it's normally a bit of gut feeling for me, because if it wasn't just gut feeling, if they had really good fixtures and really good data, they probably wouldn't be a differential anyway. And also with differentials, like, I think it's nice to trust your gut feeling as well. I don't think if you're watching this, you should just follow it because I said I think they could be a good option. The fun thing about a differential is that you select a player that you think could do well that maybe not a lot of other people own, and it's no better fit in an FPL than choosing a player yourself with your own decision making and that going well for you. So I would look at this, maybe take a bit of inspiration, but choose your own player that you think could do well. If there are any differentials that I've missed, please let me know down below in the comments. Always interested to hear your thoughts. So I've picked 3 defenders, 3 midfielders, and 3 attackers, just in case you've got different players at different price points in different positions that you might be able to take out. The 3 defenders are Mykolenko, White, and Cresswell. I think all 3 of these teams have decent fixtures. Obviously, White's got the best fixture in 14, but Mykolenko and Cresswell have decent fixtures over the next 3 up to the World Cup. I do think that I would probably, whilst the Fantasy Football Hub algorithm here says that they actually favour the West Ham fixtures, I do really like the Everton fixtures, as I said. And Mykolenko/Cody/Tarkowski, you can go for whoever you want here. I do think they could be a good option. None of them have exceptional data. Cody has had a few chances so far. Tarkowski obviously loves a bullet header. I really realistically think you could pick any of them. I do think Everton have been very lucky to keep the amount of clean sheets they have and to concede as a few goals as they have. They're tending to concede a maximum of like 1 goal most weeks. The data would suggest that Pickford's been very good, and also the teams that they've faced have finished quite poorly. So do take it with a pinch of salt, I guess. Look at their underlying data as well. But I do think Mykolenko could be good. White and Cresswell have actually got pretty decent underlying data there, as you can see by the non-penalty expected goal involvement. Cresswell projected to get the most points of the 3. So maybe you back a West Ham defender. Another clean sheet in game week 13 for them. They've got 2 home fixtures in 15 and 16. I definitely think you could do worse than a Cresswell or a Zuma or a player like that. Of course, Zuma did score in 13, so it could be an option too. So they're 3 defenders from 3 defences that I do think could do well over the final 3 weeks. With respect to midfielders, I've currently got Gordon, Eze and Anthony. So you've got the 2 cheaper players in Gordon and Eze. I don't think either of these are absolutely amazing, but I think when you consider a player that we're going to discuss later on, Almiron, a lot of people are going absolutely crazy for Almiron, and also Andreas Pereira at the moment. 2 cheap players that are delivering on a weekly basis. The underlying data for Gordon is actually better than both of them, and the underlying data for Eze is better than Andreas and almost as good as Almiron's, I believe. So they're both putting up really good data, and for people to be going so crazy about the likes of Almiron and Andreas Pereira, Gordon and Eze could be 2 decent differentials. Now, I think Gordon's minutes might be a slight risk. Do let me know down below if you're an Everton fan. I'm not keeping massively up to date with Everton this season, but he obviously hasn't played every game. I don't know if that's just due to injury or a bit of rotation. So maybe you could go for like an Iwobi or a Gray instead. Maybe talk to some Everton fans, try to work out who's got the best expected minutes over the next few weeks. But I do think that an Everton midfielder could do fairly well. Iwobi has been improving recently, so maybe he's an option too. As you can see, they've got the 5th best fixtures, as we spoke about at the start. 0.53 expected goal involvement for Gordon is pretty good. And I think that Eze and Elise, whichever one you want to go for, the Crystal Palace boys, they have been keeping up potentially with Zaha, especially Eze has been looking very good. Projected to get 10.9 points over the next 3, which isn't terrible. Decent underlying data, the 7th best fixtures in the Premier League. So I really don't mind Eze, and I do just have a bit of a soft spot for Elise. I think every time I watch Elise, I think he's an exceptional talent, and I do feel like he's a slightly more of a goal threat than Eze, and I feel like he maybe goes for goal a little bit more often. So maybe Elise could be a cheeky differential too. And then Anthony's sort of that more mid-price, sort of more expensive midfielder. Obviously, I'm wearing the Manchester United kit now. I absolutely adore Anthony. We'll discuss him in the midfield section a bit later as well. Putting up decent numbers, 12.1 projected points over the next 3. I think he's the most nailed of the 3 Manchester United attackers, or 4 when Martial's fit. I think Rashford, Anthony, Sancho, Martial, that would be our front 4 when everyone's fit. Ronaldo's been a little bit better recently, but I do think that's our first choice front 4. I think Rashford is probably the biggest goal threat. Sancho, I think, is very talented, but is struggling recently. Martial's great when he plays, but he's so injury prone. So I think just for expected minutes and also decent data, Anthony probably would be my choice of the Manchester United attackers at the moment, and 3 decent fixtures coming up for Manchester United. And then the 3 strikers I've got, Scamacca, Wilson and Calvert-Lewin. We'll start with Scamacca. He's playing a lot of minutes, and I will hold my hands up. I didn't expect him to play the amount of minutes he has. I told a lot of people not to go for him 4 or 5 weeks ago, and again, I'll hold my hands up. That maybe wasn't the best call. I just thought that Antonio would start a few of these games, and it looks like Scamacca is definitely first choice at the moment. Playing a lot of minutes, looking fairly good, but maybe not scoring the amount of goals that Moyes might want. So I still think there's a small chance Antonio plays one of the next 3 in the Prem, but I would say Scamacca does look a lot better for expected minutes, and he's showing really good data. He's got the 2nd best data on this list at 0.6 expected goal involvement, the 3rd best fixtures in the Premier League as well, according to Fantasy Football Hub. So I think by all accounts, at 6.8 million, Scamacca could be a decent option. Unfortunately, both Scamacca and Bowen came off the pitch when West Ham had their penalty. So Ben Rama took the penalty. So we've got no idea. Maybe Scamacca would have taken that penalty. Maybe it would have been Bowen. It would have been nice to know that, but I still think Scamacca's a decent option. And then you've got the 2 more expensive strikers in Wilson and Calvert-Lewin. Wilson continues to be one of the best assets in the game at the moment, according to underlying data. 0.73 expected goal involvement, non-penalty per 90. Exceptionally good. The 2nd best projected points on this list out of all of the players here. So I think Wilson maybe someone going under the radar. The fixtures aren't terrible for Newcastle. They've got 2 decent fixtures in the next 3, and they're a team that are attacking well. So I think you could definitely do worse if, for example, Solanke is out injured and you've got money in the bank, or maybe you just want to make a switch away from Mitrovic maybe in game week 15, or you're just looking for a change in your striking options. I think you could definitely do worse than Wilson, and he continues to show really, really good data. And then the final one is the man on your screen, and the one that I'm really considering, and that is Calvert-Lewin. He's only played 189 minutes this season, so his non-penalty and goal involvement's largely irrelevant, expected goal involvement, but it's 0.33, which is one of the worst on this list for the attackers. But I still think that, generally speaking, when Calvert-Lewin plays, he's got very good data usually, especially against over a larger sample size. And as far as we know, he'll still be on penalties. And like I said, I just really like the fixtures for Everton over the next 3. So I genuinely am considering Calvert-Lewin. At the moment, I think Toney, Wilson, Calvert-Lewin, maybe Jesus, but I am really, really tempted. I just like taking a few punts, especially when we've only got 3 weeks and then we're going to have a complete reset of our teams. I think Calvert-Lewin could be really good for the next 3. So those are the players. If I'm highlighting the ones that I'm really looking at, I think probably Cresswell from the defenders looks good for both clean sheets and also attacking threat. I think from the midfielders, maybe take a cheeky punt on Anthony, and I think Wilson and Calvert-Lewin would be my choice from the strikers. Like I said, do let me know who your favourite differentials are down below in the comments. So the next section is to discuss the midfield choices, because a lot of people looking at selling/buying one of these 6 players from sort of 7.6 to 8.4, those £8 million-ish midfielders. I am wearing the same kit as my main man, Anthony, but of course I will try and remain as unbiased as possible. And to be honest, I think I do a fairly good job at not being biased towards Manchester United. So these are the players. Probably the main question asked this week when I asked your questions over on Twitter was, should I sell Zaha/Bowen for one of Saka/Foden? So I think a lot of people are looking at maybe moving these players around. So I thought what would be useful is just to look at the 6 players that I think people are looking at around these price points and discuss whether I would buy them, sell them, and maybe give them a bit of a ranking as well. So I suppose the first thing to note is Foden is absolutely exceptional. And for me, without even looking at the data, just watching the games, a bit of everything, fixtures as well, Foden is the one to own at the moment. And I would argue if it's for free, I would feel relatively comfortable selling any of the other 5 to Foden only for free. I think once you start making it into a hit, I still question whether that's worth it, especially some of them, right? Some of them I wouldn't mind selling for it, but some of them, such as I would not be selling a Zaha to Foden for a hit for me, because as we'll discuss in a second, Zaha looks pretty good, but Foden is definitely the standout. So if you've got a way to get to Foden for free, I just think with the fixtures over the next 3 for City, with the exceptionally good non-penalty expected goal involvement, with the exceptionally good big chance involvement per 90, over a big chance per 90, and what I've done here is I've basically added together big chances created and big chances. So that gives you a bit of an idea about how many big chances there are involved in per 90. And also the projected points. Foden looks the pick of the bunch, and I would definitely try to get him in your teams. But I think Zaha is arguably the second best option here, right? You can see he's basically 3rd best for projected points. He's 2nd best for big chance involvement per 90, and he's 2nd best for non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90. However, what he has on top of the likes of an Anthony and a Foden, and now Bowen, because I have just seen that Bowen is off penalties. He said in his post-match press conference, or the post-match interview, I should say, that Bowen is no longer on penalties. He has penalties, Zaha, right? So we're looking at non-pen goal, expected goal involvement here, but Zaha also has penalties. And I just think that I would avoid, if you can get to Foden another way, I would try and do it. And again, if it's for a hit, I just don't like selling Zaha. I hate not having Zaha. And I know he's a bit of a troll. He's been playing slightly wider in recent weeks, and he's not been getting many chances. I fully appreciate that. I just think he is still one of the better options at that price range. So if you're asking for my opinion, I wouldn't sell him personally, unless it's to go for Foden for free. I probably wouldn't even do Zaha to Saka for free. Now, I say that because, yes, Saka has a fantastic fixture in 14, but then he plays Chelsea away and Wolves away. As a 3, I much prefer Zaha's fixtures there. And then when I look at the data, he's got much better data than Saka, right? The projected points are roughly the same, but he's got almost double the big chance involvement per 90. He's got much better non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90 as well. He's very talismanic. We know he's on penalties, whereas there's a small chance sometimes, especially if Martinelli wins it, that Saka doesn't take that penalty. And just with the fixtures, I personally actually maybe just about prefer Zaha to Saka. The only reason that I'm personally looking at bringing in Saka for game week 14, because it might seem counterintuitive to say that I like, or contradictory I should say, to go for Saka when I'm saying Zaha's the better pick, is I really do like that fixture in 14. So I'm looking at maybe moving for Saka and then moving Saka on to someone else. But I think if you're looking at a player for the next 3, Zaha is arguably the slightly better option here. Saka's data, I'll be honest, has been really disappointing this season. He's got the 0.42 non-penalty expected goal involvement, which is the basically second to worst on this list, only behind Bowen. only in front of Bowen, I should say. So he's not putting up great data. Big chance involvement per 90 is okay at 0.46. I'm not saying Saka's a bad option. I may well bring him in. I may well keep him to the World Cup. But I wouldn't say Saka's a player that you should be scrambling for. Saka's definitely not a player that you should be taking a hit for, at least based on the data we've seen this season. But I fully appreciate it's a really nice fixture, Forest at home in Game Week 14. Moving on to Maddison and Bowen, both putting up pretty average data again. Bowen's has been really poor, and I'll be honest, now knowing, like I said, in the post-match interview, Bowen said that he's no longer on penalties. Knowing that Bowen's not on pens, that just drives home the fact that I will be selling him probably in Game Week 14. Yes, he's got two decent fixtures in 15 and 16, but with 0.34 non-penalty expected goal involvement per 90, it's really poor. Like, that's worse than Andreas Pereira. It's worse than Almiron, Eze, Gordon, all of these players we're mentioning. At 8.2 million, he's just not worth it. With penalties, potentially you could justify it, but even then, I'm still not sure. I think I'll be selling Bowen. I wouldn't be moving for Bowen if I was you, even in Game Week 15, 16. I know they're two good fixtures. I'm just not convinced by West Ham or Bowen. Maddison's okay, ticks along nicely, decent data, but nothing to be sort of blown away by. And according to the Fantasy Football Hub fixture ticker, the worst fixtures in the Premier League over the next three. So I would be avoiding Maddison for now, and probably Leicester players in general, which just leaves us with Anthony. We discussed Anthony in the previous section. I would put him sort of middle of the pack here. I think if you want to go for a cheeky punt over the next three, I definitely don't dislike it. I would expect him to start all three of the next three. There's a small chance he comes off early in a couple of them, but I do think he is first choice right winger in our team, and I think he's the only player that can effectively play on the right just due to the fact that he's left-footed. So I guess putting all of that together, Foden's the standout. I really like Zaha as an option. I would arguably say he's the second best on this list. I wouldn't be selling him unless it's for Foden. Definitely not for a hit for the likes of Saka or Antony. I do like probably Saka and Antony in maybe third and fourth, and then I would put Maddison and Bowen in fifth and sixth, and I probably wouldn't be looking to bring them in. But basically, Foden should be a priority. Outside of that, do what you want to do. But I wouldn't personally be taking too many hits to be switching these players around. Like I said, I am actually recording this after the West Ham-Bournemouth game. And I've just looked again on Twitter, and Solanke has apparently gone away on crutches. So good chance that Solanke is injured. We'll discuss it more throughout the week. But if you have got money in the bank, the options that I discussed in the previous section will be really good options. I really like Calvert-Lewin and Wilson as two options. Jesus and Tony really good as well. And then Skamaka obviously a little bit cheaper than those. So that might be the one way to go there. So we'll discuss it throughout the week when we get more updates. But it isn't looking great for Solanke owners, unfortunately. The final section, I just wanted to discuss Andreas Pereira and Almiron for different reasons, but also together, because these two have been fantastic in recent weeks. As I said, the underlying data doesn't necessarily suggest they should have got as many returns as they have. However, they have been delivering, and there has been a lot of discussions around, like, are these two regular starters in our team? Should we maybe be going for a 3-4-3 with Andreas Pereira / Almiron as the fourth mid, and then having like a fifth mid such as a Colback, like tucked away on the third sub? Should we be starting these rather than relying on them as an eighth attacker? And it's a good question, to be honest. Now, with Andreas Pereira, the fixtures in 15 and 16 aren't great. So I think realistically for him, it's a discussion of, do we start him in Game Week 14? But I also just want to discuss more sort of like philosophically, I guess, or like structurally, should we be thinking about for the post-World Cup teams that we're going to be building, starting the likes of Andreas or Almiron in our teams on a more permanent basis? And then Almiron has three decent fixtures, I think, especially over the next two, Aston Villa and Southampton, but even Chelsea isn't a terrible one. Should we be bringing him in this week because he's the most transferred in player at the moment? And if so, should we be starting him over the next three? So I think it is tricky, because if you look at people's teams, and especially a team like mine, like my 7 attackers outside of Andreas are all fantastic options, fairly expensive with really good underlying data. Even though I have the likes of Firmino in there, I'll probably take him out this week. I don't personally think it makes much sense, and I'm ignoring price at the moment, to start Andreas ahead of any of my other 7 attackers. Again, completely ignoring price. When you look at the underlying data, which we'll discuss in a second, I think maybe we're getting carried away by the fact that he's had a few assists in recent weeks. He obviously got the goal. I think maybe just getting carried away a little bit and saying that he should be starting every week. Yes, he's had returns. Yes, the data isn't bad for his price. But if we ignore price, which we should be ignoring price when we decide who to start in our teams, I still prefer my other 7 attackers. And when I look at a lot of other teams, people are discussing starting him ahead of the likes of like a Maddison or a Bowen. Maybe Bowen makes sense, but starting him ahead of the likes of a Maddison or a Saka or any other players such as this, or a Solanke if he was fit, or a Firmino, I don't personally like that particularly. Almiron's got slightly better data, but again, I still feel like he is a very nice 8th attacker, maybe relying on him occasionally as a 7th attacker. I'm not necessarily sure I'm convinced that either of these are permanent starters in our team, but let's look at their underlying data. Minutes per game, 83 minutes per game for both, so they tend to play every match, and they tend to see almost 90 minutes in most games. FPL points per 90, 4.51 for Andreas Pereira, 5.99 for Almiron. They are both overperforming their expected data and their expected FPL points. So as you can see, Andreas Pereira ever so slightly overperforming his expected FPL points. And then Miguel Almiron every 90 minutes is overperforming his expected FPL points by approximately 1 point. So across the season, that would be fairly decent. That would mean Almiron's outperformed his expected points by 38 if he plays, obviously, all 38 games. So they are both overperforming, definitely. And again, when we look at their expected data, it's decent but not fantastic. It's 0.39 expected goal involvement for non-penalty expected goal involvement for Pereira and 0.43 non-penalty expected goal involvement for Almiron. So I don't look at either of those and they don't blow me away. But I guess when you compare to the likes of Saka and Bowen, again, they are showing fantastic value. Like they're both matching Saka and they're both outscoring Bowen. So if you're comparing them to some of the maybe less performing £8 million mids, they're doing very well. But these still aren't mind-blowing statistics. This would suggest to me they'll get you an FPL return maybe every 2 to 3 games, which for their price is great. But if we ignore price and you're asking me, should you be starting them ahead of some other attackers, I'm less convinced. I would probably say that Almiron's the one to own. I just feel like Almiron's the more attacking one. Yes, their overall non-penalty expected goal involvement is very similar, but Almiron's is mostly made up through expected goals, whereas Andreas's is mainly made up through expected assists. So Andreas is a very creative player. Almiron's more of a goal threat, and you can actually see that by their touch maps and also their touches in the box. Almiron's getting almost 5 touches in the box per 90. Andreas is getting less than 2 touches in the box per 90. So Almiron is more involved in the area, whereas Andreas drops a little bit deeper and is usually looking to assist Mitrovic. So putting that all together, Andreas Pereira and Almiron are both 2 really good options in FPL at the moment. Would I start them every week? Probably not. Would I be happy starting either of them this week against Everton or Aston Villa? Absolutely. But I wouldn't necessarily force them into your team ahead of some other really good attackers. And like I said, the likes of Eze, the likes of Gordon, are actually putting up slightly better underlying data than Pereira and Almiron for only slightly more than Pereira and about the same price as Almiron. So I do think there are other alternatives that are showing good data. I just think these have performed very, very well in recent weeks, and maybe it's a little bit of recency bias and getting a little bit carried away by their recent returns. But let me know if you plan on either buying or starting Pereira/Almiron this week. I think they're both great options, and we'll definitely discuss the inclusion of both in our World Cup Unlimited transfer squad. So guys, there you have it. That is my game week preview/transfer targets tips video all rolled into one. Hopefully giving you all of the key information you need to make the best decisions this week. It's been a little while since we did this video because we had like 3 deadlines in the space of 7 days. So it meant that I couldn't get out these extra videos with all of sort of the detailed graphics and the detail analysis. So if you do appreciate these game week preview videos and all of these sort of statistical analyses that I do and all the graphics that I put together, I would massively appreciate you doing 2 things. Number 1, please do subscribe to the channel. We're on the road to 50,000 subscribers before the World Cup. And also please drop a like on the video. I'm going to go ambitious for this one and ask if we can hit 1,500 likes on this game week preview video. I would massively appreciate it, guys. But until next time, thank you very much for watching. Cheers. Bye-bye.